You can feel it in your body when you think about them thinking about you. That strange, hollow recognition in your chest that somewhere out there, the person who rejected you is missing you now. Not in the way you miss them, which has softened into something more like scar tissue than open wound, but acutely, desperately, in ways that contradict everything about how easily they seem to let you go. Your body knows this before your mind confirms it. That tightness in your stomach when their name crosses your mind. That familiar ache that arrives with the question, do they ever lie awake at 3 a.m. realizing what they lost? The answer your body already knows is yes, they do. The avoidant who rejected you, who made you feel like your depth was burden, who treated your emotional capacity like it was too much, who walked away from the best thing they'll probably ever have, is miserable without you in ways that are slowly destroying the defended peace they thought rejecting you would restore. And here's what nobody tells you about why they miss you specifically. It's not just that they lost a relationship, it's that they lost the only person whose specific combination of qualities created the exact environment their wounded self needed, even though their defended self couldn't tolerate it. You weren't replaceable. You weren't generic empath who could be swapped for another understanding person. You were specific alchemy of depth and stability, patience and boundaries, attunement and strength that they will spend years trying to find in others and failing because that combination isn't common. It was you. But here's the part that might make your stomach tight right now. They're missing you doesn't mean they deserved you, doesn't mean you should have stayed, doesn't mean their suffering obligates you to relieve it. And it doesn't mean they've developed the capacity to honor what they now recognize they lost. They miss the empath. The empath has moved on. And understanding why they're missing you so desperately might answer the question your body keeps asking. But it should also confirm the choice your body is making right now to keep building life without them. The irreplaceable qualities you provided that they're discovering don't exist in anyone else. The avoidance missing isn't about generic relationship nostalgia. It's recognition that 3 specific things you provided as empath are irreplaceable because they came from who you fundamentally are. Understanding what they're actually missing helps you see your worth reflected in their loss. They miss how you understood them without requiring extensive explanation. Your natural attunement, creating ease they took for granted, while experiencing but recognize as rare now that everyone else requires constant explanation. You just knew when they were stressed without them saying it, knew when they needed space without them asking, knew what their silence meant, what their withdrawal was protecting against, what was happening beneath their defended exterior. This understanding felt invisible to them while experiencing it because it was constant, like air they breathed without noticing they were breathing. Now, they're with people who don't understand them naturally, people who need everything explained, people who misinterpret their withdrawal as personal rejection rather than recognizing it as pattern. And the friction of having to explain themselves repeatedly to people who still don't quite get it is teaching them what your empathic attunement provided, effortless understanding that made them feel known without having to be vulnerable about explaining themselves. Every conversation with someone new that requires explanation you never required is a reminder that what felt like you being reasonable was actually you being extraordinarily attuned in ways most people simply aren't capable of. The missing lives in their body as constant low-level irritation that nothing feels as easy as it felt with you. They're working harder to be understood by people who understand them less. And the exhaustion of this is the void where your attunement used to make everything feel lighter. They miss your capacity to feel deeply while remaining emotionally stable. The rare combination of depth and groundedness that let them relax, because your emotional range never became their emergency. You felt things deeply, You had access to emotional complexity they don't have, could sit with painful feelings without collapsing, could experience intensity without becoming volatile. But your depth never became chaos they had to manage. You felt everything while remaining fundamentally okay, fundamentally grounded, fundamentally stable in ways that meant your emotions were yours to feel rather than theirs to fix. This specific combination, depth without chaos, feeling without fragility, is what they're discovering is nearly impossible to find. New people are either emotionally defended like they are, which feels hollow and unsatisfying because there's no real substance to the connection, or new people are emotionally intense in ways that feel overwhelming and chaotic, which triggers their defenses and makes them want to withdraw. You were the sweet spot between these extremes. You had the depth that made connection feel real, combined with the stability that made the depth feel safe rather than threatening. Without you, they're oscillating between relationships that feel emotionally empty and relationships that feel emotionally dangerous, and neither creates the specific feeling your combination of depth plus stability created, connection that felt both substantial and safe simultaneously. They miss how you handled their withdrawal, staying present without pursuing, giving space without abandoning, maintaining your center while allowing their distance. When they withdrew, you didn't do what most people do. You didn't pursue desperately, which would have made them withdraw further. You didn't retaliate with equivalent coldness, which would have eliminated any safety. You just remained. Gave them the space they said they needed while staying fundamentally present in your own life, available without being demanding, there without being intrusive. This specific response to their most difficult pattern is what they're missing in their body every time someone new responds differently. New people either smother them when they need space, trying to close the distance through pursuit that makes the avoidant need more distance, or new people create their own distance in response, retaliating or protecting themselves in ways that trigger the avoidant's abandonment wounds. Both responses feel bad. Neither response creates what your response created: space that didn't feel like abandonment, presence that didn't feel like pressure. They're discovering that what they experienced as you, just being understanding, was actually you, being extraordinarily emotionally sophisticated. Most people cannot give space without it feeling like withdrawal, cannot stay present without it feeling like demand. You could do both simultaneously, and that capacity is what made relationship with them even possible. Without it, every withdrawal creates conflict cycle that makes intimacy feel dangerous rather than feel like something they could access in doses they could tolerate. How every new person becomes mirror, reflecting what you were and intensifying what they lost. The missing isn't abstract longing. It's visceral daily experience of comparison that teaches them through concrete difference between you and everyone else, what you specifically provided that apparently isn't replaceable. Every conversation reveals the absence of your depth, staying at surface level in ways they didn't notice were shallow until they experienced how naturally you went deep. They talk to someone new, the conversation is pleasant, but it stays in safe territory, never touches anything real. And in the staying shallow, they're recognizing this is how conversations feel with most people. But with you, conversations naturally went deep. You asked questions that went beneath surface. You made observations that revealed complexity. You created space where real things could be discussed without it feeling forced or performative. The depth you brought felt like how conversations should feel, felt like breathing. Now, every conversation that stays shallow, which is most conversations, feels like holding breath, feels insufficient in ways they didn't know. Conversations could feel insufficient until they lost access to the depth you created naturally. The missing lives in the specific frustration of trying to connect with people and hitting the wall of surface-level interaction over and over, never finding the substance that made talking to you feel like actually communicating rather than just exchanging pleasant words. They notice nobody picks up on their unspoken needs, creating friction where they have to articulate things you just knew. Making them recognize your attunement was gift, not standard feature. With new person, they're stressed. New person doesn't notice. They need space. New person doesn't intuit this. They're struggling. New person doesn't sense it. Every unspoken need that goes unnoticed is teaching them that all the invisible emotional labor you did, being attuned to their state without requiring explicit communication, was labor that's now absent. They're having to explain everything. Articulate needs they never had to articulate with you, request what you provided automatically. And the constant explaining is exhausting in ways that make them realize the ease they felt with you came from your doing work they didn't even recognize as work because you did it so naturally, it felt like you just understood them. Now, they're learning. Most people don't do this. Most people need explicit communication. Most people aren't naturally attuned. And every time they have to explain something you would have just known, the missing arrives fresh. Not as nostalgia, but as concrete recognition that your empathic capacity created ease that's completely absent from every other interaction. New people respond to their patterns with anxiety or anger, making the avoidant recognize that your steady understanding, when they withdrew, was exceptional rather than baseline. They withdraw from new person. New person panics or gets angry. Both responses make them remember, you didn't do this. You didn't panic when they withdrew, didn't pursue desperately, didn't retaliate with coldness, you just understood. Remained fundamentally okay while giving them the space they needed. This response, which felt like bare minimum to them during relationship, is revealing itself to be exceptional through its complete absence in new relationships. Most people respond to avoidant withdrawal with anxiety or anger because both are normal human responses to someone you care about creating distance. But normal responses make relationship with avoidant harder. You were the abnormal one. The person whose emotional regulation was strong enough to not react with anxiety or anger when they pulled away. And experiencing normal responses from normal people is teaching them that your abnormal response, your steady calm when they withdrew, was what made relationship with them even possible, because it didn't trigger more withdrawal or abandonment wounds. The missing is recognition that they lost the only person whose specific response to their most difficult pattern made intimacy accessible to them in doses they could tolerate. The moment, around 60%, where this needs to turn on you. But here's what you're not acknowledging while you track whether they miss you. Part of why they're missing feels so significant to you is because you're still organizing emotional energy around whether they recognize your value. Still checking whether they're suffering enough, still needing their pain to validate your worth, still spending mental space on someone who couldn't show up for you while they had you. Their missing you is real, and your tracking their missing is revealing something about where you still are. Not as far past them as you think you are. Because if you were genuinely done, if you were genuinely building life that doesn't need their recognition, you wouldn't care whether they miss you or don't miss you. You wouldn't feel that tightness in your stomach when you wonder if they're thinking about you. You wouldn't need to know if they're suffering appropriate consequences. The fact that they're missing still matters to you means some part of you is still waiting for their suffering to mean something, still hoping their recognition translates into your healing, still using their pain as measure of your significance. And that orientation toward them, even in their absence, is what's keeping you from being fully free. They rejected the empath. The empath's job now isn't tracking whether the rejection hurt them. The empath's job is building life so extraordinary that whether they're missing you or not missing you becomes utterly irrelevant background noise to your thriving. You checking on their missing isn't strength. It's residual attachment to someone who demonstrated they don't deserve your energy. Stop checking. Stop wondering. Stop organizing any part of your internal world around their recognition or their suffering or their missing. Let them miss you. You have better things to do than witness it. Why the missing doesn't mean capacity, and why this distinction protects you. The avoidant missing you desperately might feel like evidence they've learned or grown, but missing and capability remain separate things, and understanding this protects you from confusing their longing with their readiness. They can miss what you provided while being unchanged in their capacity to receive it. Wanting what you gave doesn't create ability to sustain what you gave if given another chance. They desperately want what you provided, the understanding, the acceptance, the depth, the safety. But wanting isn't capability. The nervous system responses that made them withdraw from your intimacy haven't changed. The wounds that made your emotional depth feel threatening haven't healed. The defensive patterns that caused them to push you away are still automatic when closeness triggers their fear. They can miss you with crushing intensity while being exactly as incapable of sustaining relationship with you as they were when they had you. Missing measures their recognition of loss. It doesn't measure their capacity to honor what they lost if somehow given access to it again. The missing might motivate desire to reconnect. It doesn't create the transformation that would make reconnection lead to different outcome than relationship produced the first time. This distinction is what protects you from interpreting their suffering, if you become aware of it, as evidence they're ready for something they're not ready for. Their missing often makes them more defended, rather than more open, because pain of missing triggers protective mechanisms that are the same mechanisms that made them lose you. Missing you hurts, constantly, and the avoidance defensive structure is designed to protect against emotional pain. So pain of missing you activates the defenses. They minimize, distract, emotionally shut down, rationalize, protecting themselves from fully feeling the missing through the same defensive strategies they used during relationship. The missing triggers defense. Defense protects them from the pain. But the defense is what created patterns that made you leave. So missing you doesn't soften them into vulnerability. It often hardens them further because they're defending against pain of missing you through the same structure that caused them to lose you. Missing creates pain. Pain activates defense. Defense prevents growth. The cycle reinforces itself, and their missing you becomes another thing they're defending against, rather than opening that leads to transformation. The relief they'd feel from getting you back would eliminate motivation for change before change occurred, making their return about pain relief rather than demonstrated transformation. Right now, they're in pain from missing you. This pain could motivate therapeutic work to address patterns, but if you accept them back now, pain ends immediately. Once pain ends, motivation ends. They wanted you back to relieve suffering. You came back. Suffering relieved, mission accomplished. Why would they now do years of difficult therapeutic work when they already got what they wanted, relief, through your presence? The motivation evaporates the moment you remove the consequence that was creating it. Accepting them back before sustained change means accepting someone whose primary motivation is alleviating their own discomfort, not someone who's developed capacity through work. Their missing creates urgency, but urgency for relief isn't same as readiness for relationship. These remain separate regardless of how desperately they claim to want another chance. what their missing actually means for your healing and what it doesn't mean. The avoidant missing you creates implications worth understanding clearly, so you can use this knowledge to serve your healing rather than letting it pull you backward into their orbit. Their missing confirms you weren't the problem, validating your perception that you were offering something valuable they couldn't receive, not that you were too much. They miss you desperately. This confirms what you needed confirmed. You weren't too much. You weren't too sensitive. You weren't too demanding. You were offering something genuinely valuable that their defensive structure couldn't receive, and the proof is that they're now recognizing its value through experiencing life without it. Your perception during relationship that you were giving something real and important that wasn't being honored was accurate. Their missing validates this completely. Use this validation to eliminate any remaining doubt about whether you were the problem. You weren't. You were the solution they were too defended to accept. Their missing is the bill coming due for rejecting someone whose worth they couldn't recognize while possessing access to it. But their missing creates zero obligation for you to relieve their suffering or participate in their healing. Their suffering, genuinely, the missing, is real and consuming, and none of it creates claim on you. You don't owe them relief from consequences of their patterns. You don't owe them opportunity to make amends. You don't owe them your participation in processing their regret. Their missing is theirs to manage through therapy, through their own work, through sitting with appropriate consequences of behavior that drove away someone valuable. You can know they miss you while maintaining complete boundaries. Their longing and your protection of yourself coexist without contradiction. Let them miss you. That's their education. Your job is building life so fulfilling their missing becomes irrelevant to your well-being. Understanding they miss you might answer questions, but the closure that actually serves you is building life where their recognition doesn't matter. They miss you. This might provide some closure about whether you mattered, might validate your experience, might answer the question your body keeps asking. But the closure that actually transforms your healing isn't about their missing. It's about your building. Build life so extraordinary that whether they miss you becomes utterly beside the point. Build relationships so reciprocal that their recognition of what they lost is just interesting footnote to your thriving. Build yourself so completely that their internal state is background noise to your forward momentum. The closure you're actually seeking isn't in their suffering. It's in your liberation from needing their suffering to validate your worth. The specific ways the missing manifests in their body in daily life that you'll never witness. The avoidance missing isn't performed or visible to you. It's private suffering that infiltrates every aspect of their existence in ways they'd never show externally, but that affect everything about how they experience being alive right now. They wake reaching for you before consciousness arrives, body turning toward warmth that's been gone for months, that 3-second window where the missing hasn't arrived yet. The body has its own memory, deeper than conscious thought. In those first moments of waking, before full consciousness, their body reaches, turns toward where you used to be, seeks the presence that was there for so long that the body learned to expect it. Then awareness catches up. You're not there. You're not coming back. The reaching is for ghost. This happens every morning. The body reaching before the mind remembers. The recognition arriving like cold water. The fresh grief of loss happening again with each day's beginning. The reaching becomes metaphor for their entire experience, constantly moving toward what you provided before remembering they destroyed access to it, constantly seeking ease you created before remembering ease exists only in memory now. Every morning, every single morning. The loss is new again. Random triggers throughout the day bring you flooding back with sensory detail that stops them physically. A song, a phrase someone uses, someone who moves like you from distance. They're in the middle of normal day, and something triggers the memory. Not just thinking of you, but full sensory re-experiencing. They can smell you, can hear your specific laugh, can see the exact expression on your face during moment this trigger connects to. The detail is overwhelming. They're stopped, literally stopped, unable to continue walking or talking or whatever they were doing, by being transported fully into memory of having you. Then it passes. The moment ends. They're back in present, and present is absence, is void. The contrast between the sensory richness of the memory and the emptiness of current reality is devastating. These involuntary flashbacks happen multiple times per day. Each one forces them to feel what they lost in full detail before returning them to the reality of what they have now, which is nothing like what the memory contains. The missing lives in these moments as physical pain, actual tightness in chest, actual difficulty breathing, actual nausea that has no external cause except the recognition of permanent loss. They compare their current life to life with you, and everything is diminished. Sleep is worse. Work feels empty. Daily activities lack the background satisfaction your presence provided. Life with you had light in it. Even though relationship was difficult, even though they struggled with your intimacy, even though their patterns were active, life felt more alive. They slept better, woke with something to look forward to. Work had meaning because they had you to share it with. Daily routines had warmth because you were part of the fabric of their days. Now, everything is gray. Sleep is disrupted by the reaching and the remembering. They wake to emptiness. Work is just occupation of time. Routines are mechanical execution of necessary tasks. The vitality that your presence created, that they took completely for granted, is gone, and in its absence, they're recognizing you weren't just person in their life. You were what made their life feel like living, rather than like existing. The comparison between the aliveness they felt with you and the numbness they feel without you is teaching them that you were infrastructure of their well-being, that they mistook for natural condition of life. They thought life just felt that way. Now, they're learning. Life felt that way because you were in it. Without you, this is what their life actually feels like. Empty, mechanical, survivable but not enjoyable. The missing is recognition that you were the difference between living and existing, and they chose existing by rejecting you. The single image. This lands on instead of summary. They wake reaching for you before consciousness arrives. Body turning toward warmth that's been gone for months. Arm extending across empty space where you used to be. That 3-second window before mind catches up and remembers you're not there and won't be there. And the reaching is for ghost. Then they're awake, fully. And the missing crashes in like cold water, and they have to start another day, carrying the weight of having rejected the one person whose specific combination of qualities created the only environment where their defended self felt safe enough to occasionally drop the performance and just exist. The reaching happens every morning. The recognition that the reaching is futile happens every morning. The missing that follows happens every day, all day, in every interaction that falls short of what you provided naturally. And you're not reaching anymore. You're building. The distance between their reaching and your building is the distance between someone who learned too late and someone who's learning right now that life gets better when you stop organizing it around people who couldn't show up for you when it mattered. Let them reach. You have better things to do with your hands than filling space in someone else's empty bed. You're using them to build something extraordinary instead. That's the difference. That's the whole story. That's what they're missing you actually means. You were worth keeping. They failed to keep you, and their failure is permanent, while your freedom is just beginning. The missing they carry isn't romantic tragedy. It's education arriving exactly when it can no longer change the outcome. Every person who falls short of what you were is teaching them what you provided. Every interaction that requires explanation you never required is lesson in what your attunement created. Every withdrawal that gets met with anxiety or anger instead of your steady understanding is reminder that you were the exception, not the rule. They're learning through loss what they should have learned through having you. That empaths who can hold depth without chaos, who can give space without abandoning, who can see wounds and love them anyway. These aren't common. These are rare. These are you. And you were there, and they had access to you, and they chose their defended comfort over honoring what you offered. And now the education is complete, but the opportunity is gone. Let them learn. Let the missing be their teacher about what it costs to reject an empath who saw their wounds and loved them anyway. Let every shallow conversation teach them what your depth provided. Let every person who can't read them teach them what your attunement created. Let every new relationship that triggers their patterns teach them that you were the person whose specific response made intimacy accessible in the only way their defended psychology could tolerate it. The missing is their consequence. The education is their process. And both are happening without your participation, without your witness, without your energy being spent on whether they're learning or suffering or recognizing what they lost. Because here's what matters more than whether they miss you. You're not missing them the same way anymore. The missing has transformed from open wound into scar tissue. Still there, still part of your story, but no longer bleeding, no longer determining how you move through the world. You're building life that doesn't organize around their absence. You're creating connections that don't require you to explain yourself constantly. You're finding people who can hold your depth without making it their emergency. You're discovering what it feels like to be with someone whose nervous system doesn't treat your emotional capacity as threat. And in that discovery, you're learning what you always deserve to know. You weren't too much. You were exactly right. For someone whose capacity matched yours. For someone who didn't need to lose you to recognize what having you meant. They're waking up, reaching. You're waking up, building. Both are responses to the same loss, but only one of these responses is creating a future worth living. Only one is transforming grief into growth. Only one is taking the pain of what ended and using it as foundation for what's beginning. That's you. That's what you're doing. That's what they're missing you confirms. You were always too valuable to waste on someone who needed your absence to recognize your worth. Their missing is permanent. Your freedom is expanding. Both are happening. Only one matters to your future. Choose accordingly and keep choosing it every morning, every interaction, every moment you're tempted to check whether they're suffering enough or missing you enough or recognizing what they lost. Keep choosing your building over their reaching. That's the path forward. That's the life you deserve. That's what it looks like when an empath finally understands that being irreplaceable to someone who rejected you is interesting information about them, but it's not reason to stop building life that proves you were always irreplaceable to yourself first. They wake, reaching for you, before consciousness arrives, body turning toward warmth that's been gone for months, arm extending across empty space where you used to be, that 3-second window before mind catches up and remembers you're not there and won't be there, and the reaching is for ghost. Then they're awake, fully, and the missing crashes in like cold water, and they have to start another day, carrying the weight of having rejected the one person whose specific combination of qualities created the only environment where their defended self felt safe enough to occasionally drop the performance and just exist. The reaching happens every morning. The recognition that the reaching is futile happens every morning. The missing that follows happens every day, all day, in every interaction that falls short of what you provided naturally. And you're not reaching anymore. You're building. The distance between their reaching and your building is the distance between someone who learned too late and someone who's learning right now that life gets better when you stop organizing it around people who couldn't show up for you when it mattered. Let them reach. You have better things to do with your hands than filling space in someone else's empty bed. You're using them to build something extraordinary instead. That's the difference. That's the whole story. That's what they're missing you actually means. You are worth keeping. They failed to keep you, and their failure is permanent, while your freedom is just beginning. The missing they carry isn't romantic tragedy. It's education arriving, exactly when it can no longer change the outcome. Every person who falls short of what you were is teaching them what you provided. Every interaction that requires explanation you never required is lesson in what your attunement created. Every withdrawal that gets met with anxiety or anger instead of your steady understanding is reminder that you are the exception, not the rule. They're learning through loss what they should have learned through having you. That empaths who can hold depth without chaos, who can give space without abandoning, who can see wounds and love them anyway, these aren't common. These are rare. These are you. And you were there, and they had access to you, and they chose their defended comfort over honoring what you offered. And now the education is complete, but the opportunity is gone. Let them learn. Let the missing be their teacher about what it costs to reject an empath who saw their wounds and loved them anyway. Let every shallow conversation teach them what your depth provided. Let every person who can't read them teach them what your attunement created. Let every new relationship that triggers their patterns teach them that you were the person whose specific response made intimacy accessible in the only way their defended psychology could tolerate it. The missing is their consequence. The education is their process. And both are happening without your participation, without your witness, without your energy being spent on whether they're learning or suffering or recognizing what they lost. Because here's what matters more than whether they miss you. You're not missing them the same way anymore. The missing has transformed from open wound into scar tissue. Still there, still part of your story, but no longer bleeding, no longer determining how you move through the world. You're building life that doesn't organize around their absence. You're creating connections that don't require you to explain yourself constantly. You're finding people who can hold your depth without making it their emergency. You're discovering what it feels like to be with someone whose nervous system doesn't treat your emotional capacity as threat. And in that discovery, you're learning what you always deserve to know. You weren't too much. You were exactly right for someone whose capacity matched yours, for someone who didn't need to lose you to recognize what having you meant. They're waking up reaching. You're waking up building. Both are responses to the same loss, aim. But only one of these responses is creating a future worth living. Only one is transforming grief into growth. Only one is taking the pain of what ended and using it as foundation for what's beginning. That's you. That's what you're doing. That's what they're missing you confirms. You were always too valuable to waste on someone who needed your absence to recognize your worth. Their missing is permanent. Your freedom is expanding. Both are happening. Only one matters to your future. Choose accordingly and keep choosing it every morning, every interaction, every moment you're tempted to check whether they're suffering enough or missing you enough or recognizing what they lost. Keep choosing your building over their reaching. That's the path forward. That's the life you deserve. That's what it looks like when an empath finally understands that being irreplaceable to someone who rejected you is interesting information about them. But it's not reason to stop building life that proves you were always irreplaceable to yourself first. What the missing reveals about the specific nature of empath-avoidant dynamics that nobody explains. The intensity of their missing you isn't just about losing a good person. It's about losing the only type of person whose psychology could create what their psychology desperately needed, but was simultaneously terrified of receiving. Empaths provide what avoidance wounded selves need most: unconditional acceptance of the actual person beneath the performance, while their defended selves experience this acceptance as existential threat. The avoidants spent their life performing, showing the world defended version that seems independent, seems fine, seems like they don't need anyone. Most people relate to the performance, love the performed version, never see beneath it because the avoidant never lets them close enough to see. But you saw them, saw the wounds, saw the fear, saw the defended child beneath the defended adult, trying desperately to protect itself from ever being hurt the way they were hurt in childhood. And you didn't reject what you saw. You loved it, accepted it, held space for all of it, without making your acceptance conditional on them hiding the wounded parts. This unconditional acceptance is what their wounded self has needed since childhood. Someone who sees the real them and doesn't leave, doesn't reject, doesn't make love contingent on performing acceptable version. But simultaneously, this acceptance was existential threat to their defended self. Because if you saw the wounds and stayed, if you loved the actual person rather than just the performance, then the defenses weren't necessary with you. And defenses not being necessary meant they'd have to actually be vulnerable, actually let you in fully, actually risk the devastation of depending on someone and potentially losing them. The acceptance their wounded self desperately needed triggered terror in their defended self. This is why they pushed you away, even while some part of them was clinging to what you provided. The missing they experience now is their wounded self grieving the loss of the only acceptance it ever received, while their defended self maintains the walls that made receiving that acceptance sustainably impossible. The empath's capacity to stay through the avoidance patterns created safety the avoidant had never experienced, but safety felt more dangerous than familiar instability because safety required trust their wounds wouldn't allow. You stayed through the withdrawal, through the hot and cold cycles, through the emotional unavailability, through patterns that would have driven most people away much earlier. Your staying created something the avoidant had never experienced: safety, consistent presence despite their patterns, reliable availability despite their push-pull, steady acceptance despite their defended behavior. This safety should have felt good, should have felt like relief. But to the avoidant, safety felt terrifying, because safety meant they could start to depend on you, could start to trust that you'd be there, could start to let their guard down and rely on your presence. And depending on someone, trusting someone's presence, letting guard down, all of this creates vulnerability to devastating loss if the person leaves. The avoidant's entire defensive structure is built to prevent this vulnerability. So the safety you created, which is what they needed, triggered their defenses against the vulnerability that safety would require. They couldn't let themselves fully receive the safety because receiving it meant risking the loss of it, and their wounds taught them that depending on someone and then losing them is the most painful thing they can experience. So they rejected the safety while it was available, and now they miss it desperately because they're learning that the familiar instability they maintained to avoid vulnerability feels worse than the vulnerability would have felt if they'd let themselves trust the safety you were offering. Empaths see the avoidance potential and believe in who they could become, but this belief created pressure the avoidant experienced as judgment about who they currently are. You saw who they could be, beneath the defenses, beneath the patterns, beneath the wounds. You saw the person they had potential to become if they did the work to heal. And you believed in that potential, encouraged it, created space for it. Loved them in ways that reflected your belief that they were capable of more than their patterns suggested. This belief should have been gift, should have been motivation. But to the avoidant, your belief in their potential felt like judgment of their present reality. If you believed they could be more emotionally available, that meant you thought their current emotional unavailability was insufficient. If you believed they could be more vulnerable, that meant their current defended state wasn't enough. Your belief in who they could become made them feel like who they currently were wasn't acceptable, even though you were literally staying with them and accepting them as they were while holding hope for their growth. The avoidant couldn't distinguish between, I see your potential and believe you can grow, and I don't accept who you are right now. Both sounded the same to their defended ears, so your belief in them felt like pressure, like expectation they couldn't meet, like evidence they were failing you by being who they currently were. They rejected you partly to escape the pressure of your belief in them, and now they miss your belief desperately because they're discovering that most people don't see any potential in them at all. Most people just relate to the defended surface and never imagine there's anything deeper worth believing in. The permanent changes your absence creates in how they experience all future relationships. Losing you didn't just create temporary missing that will fade. It fundamentally altered how they experience intimacy with anyone going forward in ways that make every future relationship harder than relationships before you. You set a baseline for what intimacy can feel like that they can never unknow, making everyone else feel insufficient by comparison, even though comparison is unfair. Before you, they didn't know intimacy could feel the way it felt with you, didn't know understanding could be so effortless, didn't know depth could coexist with stability, didn't know someone could see their wounds and stay. You showed them what's possible, and now they can't unknow it. Can't unfeel what it felt like to be with someone whose capacity matched their need, even though their defenses prevented them from fully receiving it. Every person they meet now is measured against you, not consciously always, but the measurement happens automatically. Does this person understand me without explanation the way she did? No. Does this person create the same safety? No. Does this person have the same depth? No. The comparison is unfair to the new people. The new people are normal. You were exceptional. But the avoidant can't make themselves not compare because you establish baseline for what intimacy can be, and everything that falls short of that baseline now feels insufficient even when it's objectively adequate. You ruin them for normal relationships by showing them what extraordinary relationship feels like. And this is part of why they miss you so intensely. Not just because they lost you specifically, but because losing you means losing access to a level of intimacy they now know is possible, but can't find anywhere else. The trust they had with you, however imperfectly they received it, was built over time and can't be replicated quickly with new people, making them realize trust isn't replaceable through new relationships, but only through years of building. With you, they had years. Years of you proving your consistency. Years of you demonstrating you wouldn't leave when they withdrew. Years of you showing that your understanding was reliable, not just occasional. This accumulated trust created foundation, imperfect foundation, because their defenses prevented them from fully building on it, but foundation nonetheless. Foundation that took years to establish. Now they're starting from zero with new people, and they're discovering that trust isn't something you can replicate quickly. You can't speed run years of demonstrated consistency. You can't fast forward through the time it takes to prove you're safe. New people might be trustworthy, but proving trustworthiness requires time and repeated demonstration, and the avoidant doesn't have patience for this process anymore because they know what it feels like to have established trust, and they want to skip to that feeling without doing the years of building that creates it. They're missing not just you, but the accumulated foundation of trust that existed with you. Trust that can only be built through time and experience, not through wishing it existed with someone new. They've learned through losing you that their patterns have real permanent consequences, destroying the unconscious assumption that people will always accept them back after withdrawal. Before losing you, the avoidant operated under unconscious assumption that their patterns were sustainable, that they could withdraw and people would accept the withdrawal, that they could be emotionally unavailable and people would tolerate it, that they could push people away and those people would still be there when the avoidant was ready to reconnect. This assumption allowed them to maintain patterns without fear of permanent loss, but you proved the assumption false. You left permanently. You didn't accept them back when they realized what they'd lost. You didn't tolerate patterns indefinitely. You pushed back, became closed door, rather than remained open door, waiting for them to be ready. This proved that their patterns have permanent consequences, that people don't wait forever, that there's limit to how much emotional unavailability someone will accept before choosing themselves and leaving for good. This lesson has fundamentally changed how they approach all relationships now. They can't operate under the unconscious assumption of infinite tolerance anymore. They know patterns can cost them people permanently, but knowing this doesn't mean they've developed capacity to change the patterns. It just means they now experience anxiety with new people that they didn't experience before. Anxiety that their patterns will cost them this person too. Anxiety that coexists with the patterns continuing, because knowing you should change and being able to change are different things. You taught them that consequences are real, but the teaching came too late to save the relationship with you, and the anxiety it creates with new people makes new relationships harder without making the avoidant more capable.